Welcome back to Pounding the Table, brought to you in part by StockTwits, our favorite place each week to get a pulse of the markets and hear what everyone is saying about our favorite stock and ticker symbols on crypto as well. We have a very special episode this week where we have the opportunity to sit down and interview the founder of Solana Block Chain themselves, Mr. Anatoly Yakovenko.
To say you simply flooded the system with money.
Yes, we did. That's another way to think about it. We did.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We print it digitally. So we as a central bank, we have the ability to create money.
600,000 doesn't seem like that much to possibly lose. Why do you care about getting your money back? My mother taught me something. If you ever disrespect money, you won't have any. It's karma. Every dollar I make, I kill myself to make it, and I don't want to lose it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pounding the Table. We are joined today here by Anatoly Yakovenko, co-founder of Solana Block Chain. After talking about Solana Phone over the past few episodes, we had to bring the co-founder on to set the record straight, really fully understand not only what Solana is, but what the plans are for the phone and for the blockchain overall. So before we jump in though, Anatoly, wanted to give our audience a chance to get a little bit better understanding of your specific background, kind of what inspired you to build Solana. I went to Indiana, so I'm a fellow Big Ten alumni. I saw you went to Illinois, and then I saw your kind of past engineering roles. You spent about 12 years here at Qualcomm, had a short stint over at Dropbox. So I'd love to hear, I don't know if there was any influence from your career prior to Solana, or just really any influences you had along the way to inspire you to build Solana.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Definitely love to dive in. So as you mentioned, I spent most of my career at Qualcomm. I'm an engineer. I was there really as a IC, individual contributor, just working on almost from day one on optimizations. Like I went to Illinois, I had a startup with some friends that was doing voice over IP, and this is 99 to 2003 time. We saw the .com crash, and we were trying to build like automation for phones. And if we had any sense, we would have gone to Silicon Valley and pitched it as what eventually became Grand Central Dispatch and Google Voice. But we were trying to bootstrap it locally in Illinois after the crash, and that didn't work out. But I learned a ton, ended up being hired by Qualcomm, was there like optimizing stuff from like push to talk in those early days. Like, I don't know if you guys even remember that. To my last project, the tech I was working on was like being used to optimize like Project Tango augmented reality, the first Google augmented reality device. I think the first augmented reality device period in a mobile handset. So I kind of saw the evolution of hardware from these like 2 megabyte dinky flip phones to here's a supercomputer in the palm of your hand, and it can like modify what you see from the real world and make it magic. So that was a ton of fun. And like, I loved my experiences where I got to build platforms like for devs. So I was one of the early Brew developers, worked on the kernel, built a ton of libraries and then like things for devs. The project I was working on that was being used for Project Tango also was a developer platform, but for DSPs, we were trying to open up all this unused area of silicon that Qualcomm built for general purpose development. And when I saw Ethereum pop up and really started paying attention to it in 2017, I saw it as a new developer platform, new way for devs to build new kinds of applications. And that's what really got me into like, just like kind of nudged me into thinking about like, how would I do this? And then, as the legend goes, I had 2 coffees and a beer, and I had this eureka moment that there's a way to encode passage of time as data. And I had this like really high level idea that I think the stuff that we worked on at Qualcomm, even though it was working on wireless protocols, but all of them use time as a way to manage communication across the network. I think all those technologies probably apply to this. So right. Just like a really high level gut feeling, and ended up starting Solana. I got a lot of the early employees, co-founders, first folks that we hired were super senior folks at Qualcomm, like people that were compiler experts, GPU experts, like platform builders. One of my bosses, my managers, was like my manager for most of my career. There was our first, first or second hire, if you want to call it that. So that was like super fun experience, because I was, even from my early days in college, I always had a side project that I was working on, that I always had a dream. Okay, if I figure this out, this is going to be my company, right? My thing. And this is the first one that actually had any legs. And like, just, you could see how fast we were building and how fast we were solving relevant problems, and like just things all came together.
Real quick, Tony, I know you're going to jump into some deeper questions, but coming off of that, what challenges did you face along the way? And there's so many different chains out there, but you guys have done a phenomenal job of breaking through, to being one of the top coins that people think about, right? And so there had to have been some struggles and some marketing that you had.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, for whatever reason, I mean, a bunch of competitors at that time raised $100 million rounds. We barely got together $3 million as a seed round, and then had like, I think about 13 something as our Series A or whatever. And people were like, how are you going to compete with all these big companies that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars? How are you going to compete with these projects led by tenured professors with Turing Awards? Like, you guys have never worked in blockchain or whatever. So there's a lot of naysayers and a lot of backlash. But I think our experience at Qualcomm and building networks, I don't know, in retrospect, to me, it's obvious. LTE, CDMA, these networks handle billions of users. They are attacked by state actors like all the time. The device that we build, the chip, can't trust the operating system. Like, we can't trust Google, we can't trust TSMC. Like, we have to design things with really robust security practices. It was like, I think out of everyone's experience that came into crypto, I think working in mobile, especially at that low level, was probably the most like relevant experience anyone could have. So a lot of like overcoming skepticism, because our claims were pretty far out there, but we started proving them pretty early on. We had like, people didn't believe that you could handle that many signatures per second, or you could process that many transfers and stuff. And folks from like Vitalik wrote that classical consensus like BFT can't scale beyond a few hundred nodes. So when I'm like on paper showing, look, this, if you add cores and you have this much bandwidth, then it should handle 10,000 nodes, no problem, right? That's just, it was hard for people to put those pieces together, but there were enough people in venture and like folks that took us seriously to make a go of it. And we were right on basically on a ton of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just going off of the whole thought of so much competition out there. I mean, there's I think 10,000 cryptos now in existence, and number goes up and down depending on the market these days. Like, Solana as a chain itself is one of those that did break through. And I think that the first conversation to have before really getting into it is just, is this a multi-chain future? And I think that obviously you guys, as like one of the bigger chains that's not, ETH or Bitcoin, that gives credence to that notion that it's going to be a very significant multi-chain future.
At least 3, maybe. I don't know.
At least 3.
I think this is like what does it mean to be multi-chain? Are you thinking from market cap or transactions? Because we could live in a world where there could be a bunch of chains with high market cap, but 95% of the transactions all run on Solana.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. I was more so just thinking, like, is there going to be, maybe a series of 10 or 20 or 30 coins that get into a big price range that all do different things, right? Like, I know Bitcoin means one thing for someone, and Ethereum's got gas fees. So of course there's going to be competitors when you can cut rates and allow for faster transactions. So stuff like that is more where I'm thinking.
And those are like, I think, really interesting questions, because they kind of go down to the heart of what is crypto. And to a lot of folks that have listened to me, I look at the network that we're building. It's a communications network. It's sending a cryptographically signed message to all the participants around the world and guaranteeing that it arrives to everyone around the world. And that's a very kind of, I look at it as like, it's like a packet switch network, just does redundant replication. It's pretty boring, right? In what it does. And it's not, I don't think of it as a financial, monetary, like revolutionary thing. And maybe those narratives are enough to build a multi-chain world simply because people are really really want to believe that Bitcoin is this idea of stored value, and, you know, Ethereum is like an ultrasound money thing.
You could definitely see that. Yeah. And I know that this just kind of leads into the conversation of decentralization as one of the big reasons, and if not the biggest driver of crypto in general. Right. And I know that a lot of people who speak in the crypto community with, you know, they look at Ethereum, and they've been recently looking at Solana much more, especially with OpenSea's addition of like NFTs there, and just the Magic Eden round and all those things that are just really bullish for Solana in general. But I think for the success of that decentralization, right now you guys are finally crossing, I believe, over half the number of nodes that Ethereum has, right? So a lot of people have been saying that, you know, a lot of the transactions done are 60, 70, 80% done internally. And that's just kind of becoming a really big point right now, that you guys are finally past that like halfway mark and really getting to that upper echelon of chains.
Yeah, there's two things. So my belief is that decentralization is a lagging thing. You actually have users first that need to use the chain, and because they need to use it, they start running nodes. It's pretty obvious. And maybe they use it because they're paranoid about financial things, and they treat their Bitcoin like gold, right? And they really want to make sure that it's secure, so they run nodes, right? And that's a use case. And same thing for DeFi and stuff like that. And what you see on Solana is that the number of boxes that run Solana, a large portion of them, I think close to half, are driven by applications like folks like Magic Eden, from folks like big ones that you heard of, Phantom Magic Eden, they run nodes, to small NFT projects that have a governance dashboard. They want to provide a high service, high guarantee that all their you know, assets are loaded and RPCs work great. They also run nodes. So that means to me that there's like an extrinsic reason for this network to survive. Somebody's actually needs this data, right? They need this data available. They need these transactions to land. And that's really, really important, because what really fundamental point of decentralization is if there's a catastrophic attack, people start cutting internet cables, Yellowstone blows up, right? Russia nukes AWS, that as long as one of these boxes survives, then we can recover. And to have that box survive, you need somebody to care for it, somebody to keep it updated, keep it in sync. And businesses that depend on the chain are the prime candidate to do that, because their users will immediately complain, hey, this thing is down. My requests are failing. Right?
I've done it.
Having that constant demand is actually really, really important. So I think how we've been really focusing on it is, we as a user of the chain, we build products like Saga. We want the chain to be cheaper, faster, and more reliable. So all the changes, everything else that folks do analysis and try to improve the network, these are all basically driven by those three things. Can we make it cheaper? Can we somehow make it faster, more reliable? And that drives users, right? That drives a better experience, and that drives decentralization, because people run more boxes because they need that data.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty simple, I think, concept at the end of it, but I think people often get lost in the meaning and kind of the fantasy of decentralization, almost what does it mean to you?
Right.
They're hoping they're going to go into RuneScape soon, and that's going to be the world around them.
Right. Well, he just stole my answer for my next question. I was kind of going down that route. But no, I think you brought up a really good point, though. It was the first podcast that I had listened to that really kind of clicked for me of why crypto is valuable and important. In the US, more or less, we trust our banking system and things run relatively smoothly. And now that I'm working on more of the institutional side of crypto, I see the value, even something as simple as remittance. how much cheaper and faster you're talking about, that money shouldn't be that expensive to move money, right? As silly as that sounds. But some of those other things you just mentioned, Saga, there's this notion of course, of Moore's law. So, is there other things that you guys are looking at right now to continue to move faster and more efficient beyond Saga, which you just mentioned?
In terms of scalability, like basically you can go grab like a dual core EPYC 7702 system, dual socket one that's 128 cores, and test it, and that thing can benchmark to like 500,000 transactions per second.
Wow.
But that's a very, very expensive box.
Mm-hmm.
And like deploying that to 10,000 validators is very expensive because you don't need that load right now, right? You don't need that capacity. So there's a bit of like, can we get enough users and usage on the network? And does the cost of the hardware get lower and lower to the point where validators start upgrading it? And that's kind of slowly happening, but these are multi-year processes. Like the hardware upgrade cycle is every 2 years. So we're like kind of going through, I think we went through an upgrade cycle like when we launched, bumped up all the requirements. I think probably next year you'll start seeing folks talking about, okay, we need more cores, more capacity across the network, and we'll see what happens. There's also we've seen like development across pretty simple data structures become really, really mature. So there's a project being built for NFTs and tokens to Merkleize and store them effectively in the ledger history as opposed to in the state. If folks are technical enough to understand, like state growth is like the biggest threat to Ethereum, and that's the size of the memory that is computationally available to smart contracts on demand. So Merkleizing a bunch of that state and making it available across, like in the ledger instead, reduces the cost and reduces the state, but allows you to have like mints with 10 million users, right? So you can mint directly to 10 million. You can
Unheard of.
Right. You can start building things where like you have a Minecraft style game and every block is its own NFT and things like that. Because the amount of state that it's stored on chain is really, really small. So things like that, I think, are pretty interesting, and we'll see where they go. And the only thing that we really need to make sure is that the network keeps getting faster with every release, with every hardware cycle. But like us and like all the other users of this, like, and contributors to the code base, they all want the same thing. These are like kind of like it's almost downhill now because we've all agreed on how we're going to get there and what the work needs to be. And it's just the process, open source development process that you see on Linux. You do a lot of analysis, identifying like the bottlenecks and then fixing them and making better and better releases.
Right. So improving the hardware and the software, but how do you really get out to more people? So I know that there's the Nakamoto coefficient, right? You want to be as decentralized as possible. So how do you get about doing that in the most efficient and successful manner?
So the Nakamoto coefficient really impacts liveness. And this is not liveness forever. In the catastrophic failure case, right? Like Russia nukes AWS or whatever, or Yellowstone blows up. You expect the Nakamoto coefficient to be destroyed as well. You only need one box there to provide the history and to recover the entire thing. And that obviously takes users, like validators, to come together and figure out how to do that. But to prevent the risk of that, make the probability of that as low as possible, you want the highest Nakamoto coefficient that you can get. And that's a really tough problem because generally the way people stake is they look at like the top 5 validators and they kind of pick at random, and the stakes are very sticky. They kind of stake to those nodes only. So how do you dislodge that? Bunch of efforts there. Like some are coming in from our partners, like folks like Copper, Fireblocks. These are institutional custodians. They can start providing support for stake pools. That means that those big like token holders that are institutional based can then deposit their tokens in a stake pool and then spread it out across the network. And we're seeing stake pool adoption kind of start penetrating across DeFi because stake SOL is now an asset that's movable and tokenized and can move into pools and stuff like that. And this is like a slow process. So it'll take, I think, education and people to understand that when they do that, they improve decentralization, the Nakamoto coefficient, but it definitely takes time. But as far as does it work or not, our test net where, we can control the stake distribution, that thing has 3,000 nodes and a Nakamoto coefficient over like 600, which is, I think, the highest in the world, like of any network. And network runs fine. Like we see that everything that we thought was going to be stable and work still works even at that scale.
So let's switch gears here just a little bit. I know Tony just mentioned Magic Eden. So an NFT marketplace just got a valuation of 1.6 billion, right? And what we call somewhat of a bear market, right? I don't know if it's a full on crypto winter, but nonetheless, it shows that there's some validation there that they believe in this, right? Long term. And so NFTs obviously had that huge uproar where everyone, seemed to be talking about NFTs. And then one week they're no longer around, right? Now they're starting to see like a comeback. And I have a few that Tony kind of introduced me to, and he's been a huge fan. This is not just, him saying this. He's been pounding the table really on Solana for quite some time. So he got me into Magic Eden, and I've started to see NFTs slowly start to come back. And being again on the institutional side, I had to go beyond just pictures of cats and things like that, right? I'd love just your take overall on where NFTs can go, because I think people really need to start realizing that it's beyond just a cartoon necessarily. There can be smart contracts involved with real estate. There can be so many different things.
I think despite like what we saw, which was really surprising, is that despite like the macro downturn in crypto, user like transactions and things like Magic Eden and Solana NFT platforms started growing actually. So we saw like, especially when you kind of contrast it to Ethereum, the behavior of Solana users is that they transact way more often with their NFTs, like 5 to 10 times more often than they do on Ethereum. That's obvious because it's cheaper, right? And that actually meant that like retention is higher and more users are entering the ecosystem. So volumes on Magic Eden are lower than OpenSea, I think, by a factor of like 5 or something like that. But when you look at like day-to-day volumes, it's like 2 to 3 million, which comes down to like 60, 70 million per month, which is insane. Like that's a lot of money.
Big volume.
Yeah. And this is like today, right? Not during the crypto boom or anything like that. And this is a web company that is making tremendous amount of profit without touching the Google ad stack or the Facebook ad stack. There's no ad exchange there. There's no SaaS subscription, right? This is a Web3 company that's making large revenue completely in the Web3 world, totally separated from Web2. And that to me means that this is actually like has legs, and it's interesting. And I think it's going to transform how IP is developed, how brands are built. I think the next Marvel, the next Disney is going to be built out of these NFTs, like experiences and sets. And that's pretty exciting. I think every artist, every like storyteller, every creator that is thinking about like, how do I break out on my own instead of working for whatever Disney or EA, this is like the time to do it and the place to do it. You have all the tools and there's like plenty of revenue, right? It's not a pipe dream. So I think that is kind of really, really exciting and interesting. And how that plays out in terms of where these things integrate with governance, smart contracts, gaming environments, I think is still open-ended. And I can see it going and start separating into things that are totally brand specific, like somebody building the next Hello Kitty, right? Maybe not as involved in the smart contract side, but like a project like Biomes is building a full Minecraft where every item is an NFT. There's going to be a lot more smart contracts there and a lot more interactions between the user and the chain. But all of those things, under the hood are very, very simple data structure that's just the ownership of which is tracked on chain, like a very, very simple, dumb NFT entry.
Right.
It's pretty cool, right? I did not expect this at all.
It is funny because, I joke that, it's just a picture of a cat, right? And I think that some people, like the naysayers of NFTs, they don't really fully understand, again, where it can go. And I was a naysayer, to be honest. And Tony kind of slowly but surely converted me over, understanding. I was in New York. I had access to go into a Dead Fellas concert. And then there was what's the other one I went to?
The Bored Ape. Yeah.
Bored Ape. I should know that one. Bored Ape. Right. And so you kind of start to see, and it's really building the community where there's something of value behind it. I think a lot of these artists and entertainers are going to be able to have NFTs, and be able to gain access to go backstage, to go to new concerts and things like that. Taking it a step further, again, like with smart contracts for real estate. So it is definitely much more than just cartoons that people sometimes poke fun at. But any new technology, you kind of need to start small and start to grow over time, and it snowballs and you start to see where it actually goes to. We definitely have to talk about the Solana Phone. When Tony first mentioned it to me, my first thing that popped in my head, and thinking probably too literal here, is, how can you compete with an Apple? How can you compete with Androids? They have billions and billions of dollars behind them, many connections globally, of course, as well. And so Tony kept saying it's not about the phone. And I'm like, well, we're talking about the phone, so it has to be about the phone, right? And, I was just giving him shit going back and forth, of course. But I'd love to hear, now that understanding your Qualcomm background and experience in that space, where it's going, where it's at today, anything you can share around, release. And I don't give too much away here, but whatever you feel comfortable with sharing there, I'd love to dig in.
Yeah. So it's both. It's not about the phone and it's about the phone.
You listen.
I think it's really, really hard to build a new phone. Like, just really, really hard. But it's much, much cheaper today than it ever was. So when the Amazon Fire launched, I had to work on that. When the QNX devices launched, I had to work on those. WebOS ones, whatever, like the Windows Metro phone. Those are all great pieces of hardware built by amazing companies that all failed commercially. And I think the reason why is because they're really, really trying to break out to general consumers. And the opportunity with crypto is that you now have a new consumer base, crypto people. It's weird. And they have special needs. And the needs that they have is are really, really hard to understand for normal consumer behavior, because they need really secure cryptographic signing. Normal consumers don't need that, right? So there's an opportunity there to build a device that makes that signing experience, custody, the integration between that and the applications and the rest of the world through even tap to pay payments, a delightful, awesome experience. And if we succeed there and we have, 50,000 dedicated Web3 users that love this device, that's a better distribution channel for devs than the big app stores. And I always think of it from the devs perspective. How do we unblock devs to build whatever it is that they want to do with Web3, to do it in mobile? And this is the way to do it. We give them awesome users that love Web3, that have an amazing, secure experience to sign transactions, and an app store that's extremely Web3 friendly. And now devs build awesome products. Those products are so good that people actually go buy the device for that. That's how we win. This is when I'll know that we have something, is that when a developer ships an app, that somebody goes out and says, okay, I'm going to buy the stupid phone because I want that application. And that's really, really tough, but somebody has to do it, because Web3 in some ways does threaten how the web is monetized in the world today. Like, when you look at user generated, truly user owned digital content, not the idea of ownership from when you buy a movie on Amazon, buy to own. You don't actually own it. It's a rental that may never expire until Amazon says we're no longer supporting that device or whatever. Right? So when you own that NFT or that digital content and you sell it, Magic Eden cannot charge their users 20% more to buy that thing, or 30% more through their app, right? They can't eat the cost of that 20, 30% digital purchase themselves either, because that's astronomical, right? That's, at their scale, that would be $1 million a day, right? Just eating into that cost. So the business models, how those app stores monetize, have to change. And that's a really long process. And the only way that happens at Google and Apple is if we get enough traction to where they see that this is the way the wind is blowing and they actually make those changes. And I'm sure they will eventually, but somebody actually has to like kind of poke the bear, to start it. So my goal with this device is that, 50,000 awesome dedicated Web3 users, which is not a lot for a phone. Like Amazon Fire, though, that's a failure, right? Windows Metro, that's a failure. It's basically a failure for any big launch, but that's a huge success for crypto. And it's a huge success for developers.
I love that. I think what you said there in the beginning was, those other devices fail because they're trying to do the exact same thing that's been happening, and so there's nothing really differentiating. Whereas this is really purely focused on the weirdos of the world, like me and Tony here that, are crypto fanatics and view the world through a different lens. I was actually explaining, I came from marketing technology for years. And so just coming into this world now with crypto, it's fascinating. The people, it reminds me of how startups used to be, where people would get like really excited about it. They wanted to build constantly. And like that sort of went away. I noticed as like agency folks started to come into the startup world, corporate people that were used to climbing the corporate ladder, and the excitement started to phase out. And I notice it again now that I'm in the crypto world, where those individuals now all went to crypto, and the excitement, the speed, constantly changing, dealing with the regulations. Like for someone with ADHD like myself, it's a perfect fit because every single day is something new, right? And as I mentioned with regulations,
you're always doing three things while shit posting on Twitter.
Exactly. So I guess real quickly touching on some from a very high level, of course, but how do folks like yourself and Vitalik and kind of the leaders within crypto, is there, groups, or are you guys working really closely with some of the regulators? And are you guys, as you guys are building things out, kind of touching base along the way? Because that is, as well as constantly moving, and they're still trying to figure, all those pieces out, of course.
Is actually like not super close, just to be honest. I think there's like a couple groups like the Blockchain Association and stuff that tries to reach out. And I see progress like the Loomis bill that proposes that like how tokens should be treated and the CFTC can take over. And like I see that as really early good signs that like in the 90s internet, they, took Congress like 8 years to figure out how to pass the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And it was halfway broken, but it actually got done, and Google and everyone else was able to thrive and build. And I think in the US, like I'm pretty bullish on that happening, simply because government doesn't want to like see a whole economy spring up that's like outside of whatever, like outside of their structures, right? It's bad. Like it's either they close it off in the US and moves outside of the US, which is obvious to everyone that would happen, or they do something stupid and kill it, right? Like through red tape. And nobody really, I think genuinely, like the folks that I talk to that have had like conversations with in government, they all want the stuff to succeed and to succeed in the United States. It's just the way that they move is much, much slower than even academia, right? Like they move slower than than universities. And but it'll happen eventually. I think it's really, really hard for startup founders to like thread that needle. And I would highly recommend that, like, especially if they're building on Solana, we have our own internal counsel that can happy to provide like advice or, however you're thinking of your strategy to launch, and help you wade through some of those issues. But like very cool. More or less, it's not like we haven't really seen crypto slow down because of that. You still see people leave Facebook, leave Google as engineers, leave these high-paying jobs and go start companies in crypto.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that with regulations they have to kind of tiptoe on, because you can't over-regulate, because that stifles innovation then. And, as we were just talking about, like the way I look at it, I saw a great interview with Mr. Wonderful. So Kevin O'Leary was talking about crypto. It took him a while to start to like crypto. And once he viewed it through the lens of a technology versus, make-believe coins, as the naysayers sometimes say, that like really triggered for me. And I started really thinking it through that lens. And it really is like pets.com, for example. that didn't work out. Amazon did, Google did. So there's, and we've seen it already in crypto where some, have fallen off and some have been, eventually will get regulated out. But I think you guys are well positioned here, being one of the top coins. We just mentioned, Amazon phones. Google, obviously, with Android has taken off quite a bit. Now, competing against Android, again, you guys are taking a different positioning within the phone, but focusing on the ad side of things, right? Google's, I think they're still 90+% of the revenue comes from ads, right? Are they going to look at you guys as a massive competitor? And how fearful is Google around Web3?
I think what they should see is that for the first time in Android's history, people are actually tweeting that they're willing to switch from iOS to Android and or get a second device as an Android device. That has never happened before, I think, in Android's history. So that should hopefully open some eyes there at Google, and for people to realize that crypto users are passionate enough to where this is so important to their identity that they're willing to maybe give up the Apple ecosystem. And that's a really, really big signal. I don't think the numbers are big enough yet to where it matters. But I think, basically the total number of humans that actually sign cryptographic transactions on a monthly basis, using MetaMask, Phantom, whatever, is still pretty small. It's probably 10 million-ish, altogether, combined on all the networks. Yeah. And that's not enough that's like Internet 95. How many people were clicking links and knew that they went to a different website? It's going to take some human time frames for mental models to change, for people to understand this stuff, understand self-custody and real digital ownership. And when that happens, you should start seeing those numbers go to 100 million, 200 million. This is, I think, when obviously Google and Apple will actually make a change. But
and that's happening
pretty early.
I was just going to say that, I'm seeing it too on people are still building right now, and a lot of the apps that are being built are to demystify crypto, right? So if I try to explain crypto to my parents, you have to go to MetaMask, and, if you get to DeFi, you got to go to SushiSwap, or, it sounds insane, to a lot of people, but a lot of these apps are just making it, crypto more ubiquitous in the sense of the ease of pressing buy or pressing sell, right? All the back end stuff is happening still, that magic is still happening on the back end. But for a consumer, a lot of those steps along the way are happening now in the back end, where the user interface is going to be much easier and simple to use. So I'm excited to see, not to wrap here up totally on the phone, but, I'm excited to see where this goes. And I like the starting small approach, really getting those really strong users and have it grow organically. I think those are the most successful businesses typically. What, I don't know if the release date or, if you've leaked any of that information out right now in terms of when that should be kind of out for people.
Yeah. So Q1 23 should be out for the general public, but you can go to solanamobile.com and pre-order phones right now. The first kind of 4,000 devices that are pre-cert, these are basically dev kits. Everyone is working their ass off to make sure they're available for Breakpoint, first week in November. So I'm really hoping that we can hit those timelines, and that would be awesome.
And that goes right into what I wanted to ask just about XNFTs, because I've been seeing that all over my timeline. Really, I think since the phone announcement came, the entire Solana community started just using that as the big buzzword all over the place. So, I think just for a lot of people who don't necessarily know what it is, you can kind of think of it like an app in an app store. And so I wonder if that's going to be the way that so many more people come in, just because, gaming is much bigger on the phone than it is on desktop, for example. And so the same people who love crypto are the same people who like to sit up till 4 a.m. playing some RPG game. So I think that's a really cool angle as well, if you wanted to touch on that as well.
Yeah. So XNFTs, this was a Armani creation. Basically, him and he started a company called Coral, and him and Tristan, and it's kind of like a wallet, but an application based wallet where you can load apps, and those apps are X NFTs, X being executable. And the way that the Solana Saga dApp Store is designed is to be able to load those XNFTs natively as an application. So you kind of get potentially like your XNFT app that's in your backpack wallet, and your like extension should also show up on your Saga device. That'd be pretty cool. And what those things can be, right? Like, I think people should really try to experiment and build some cool shit with them. Like, one, messaging, I think, like, obviously I want people to try to just build an AOL Instant Messenger,
Right.
with away messages. But that, and also like things like Flappy Bird, like really simple like games that you can play and things like that. Right now is like the time to like see what user experiences make sense in that context, and then take it from there.
Definitely. Yeah. And I figure with all this drive towards bringing people on and growing that decentralization overall, I'm sure that you guys might face a lot of issues with congestion potentially in the future. And I know that you guys just went through an upgrade, and I'm pretty active on Magic Eden and Radium and all these sites. And I've just noticed it myself. It's like so much better. It's infinitely better.
So, man, it's so hard being a L1 dev. It's as close to being as a hardware engineer as you can get. Like, because once you tape out your chip and there's bugs in it, you're just like, you can't do anything. You gotta go and like tape out another version. And it's very similar. Like, if there's a release that we know has problems and there's a next release that fixes them, you still have to go through full testing, full audits, verification. And once you upgrade, then you see like that work like actually take effect. And you don't often know. There's a lot of uncertainty whether the fixes that we made are going to work, because the analysis is really hard. It's really hard to simulate those exact same things. But 1.10 has been fixed a bunch of congestion problems, and it has a bunch of technologies that haven't even been rolled out yet to make sure that
awesome.
We have that like stability even under extreme loads. So quick QoS by stake weight, and really cool innovation. The way Solana works is it's able to separate state. So we're able to have localized fee markets. So if you have a really spicy NFT mint that's getting a lot of traction, that one single NFT mint may see fees increase for prioritization, but that's not going to touch your normal NFT purchase of Magic Eden or your Solana Pay transaction, or, you know, whatever Serum market transaction. So making that isolated is a very, very actually, I think, big deal for crypto, and underappreciated, because it really demonstrates that it is possible for a single L1 to be a single L1 for the entire world if it has enough hardware behind it. So it's underappreciated, but we'll see in the 5-10 year timeline if that's the world that we end up in.
Yeah. What are you guys doing to continue to grow, the Solana community, whether that be different events, or I don't know if you guys do any like incubation with companies. You mentioned that you have like a team that is willing to help, developers and such like that. So not sure if you wanted to dive into any more of that, any events you guys are putting on, or meetups or whatnot.
Solana Foundation. Yeah. At Labs, we don't do much, but the Solana Foundation does a lot. Like we try to build products and try to get them to market. And like, we build everything open source and like give it away for devs, and we hope that they use them in true open source way. But Solana Foundation has been rocking it at like the hacker houses and hackathons. So this hackathon that they just launched, Summer Camp, had 7,000 registrations in I think 7 days. And that's more than the biggest hackathon that we had before. Riptide just had 7,000 total. So just at the start, we've seen more devs show up. And this is after these big macro crashes, right? We see that like the biggest bullish sign for crypto is how many smart people are entering the space and start using these networks, start building their projects, start building, like starting companies. That's like the most important thing. Like, it doesn't really matter how early we are, how broken the UX is. If you just have more smart people come in, all this stuff will get fixed. Yeah. And awesome products will get built. And we see that happening, like regardless of what macro is doing. So I think that to me is like kind of the most exciting thing. And go to solana.com. There's a link to the hackathon. Sign up as a dev or as a non-dev, and you can go into Discord and meet folks. And a lot of these teams that are engineering focused, if you're really, like if you're not an engineer, they need help, like, because companies need non-engineers. They need people that can do marketing, BD, all this other shit. So there's an opportunity for everyone basically to get involved.
Tony, shoot him your resume.
Oh, dude, this is already too much. I'm excited about it. There's one thing
podcast work, man. Like the Solana podcast was basically one of our BD tools. I would host it and I would get like projects we were trying to like work with. Like one of the things was like the first date was just come do a podcast with us.
Exactly.
That's yeah. All right, so I guess we'll have to talk after that. Before then, there's I think one key event that really got me into Solana, and I just want to know. I've thought about this a lot, and I've never gotten to ask you face to face, but the connection with like SBF and FTX. Like I'm sure you know that tweet, one of the most legendary tweets. Sell me all your Solana at $3 and F off. Like, yeah, from there you gained.
That scares me.
From there you gained like such a culty base because there's a huge cult around him, and I know that carried over because that's how I found out about Solana. And I remember farming it on Radian back in the day when I had to use my VPN to get FTX International. But what's the connection? I guess today does he ever come around and like give advice, or do you ever have meetings with them and kind of see what you can do?
Yeah, we do chat with him and his team, like across a bunch of different things, like Solana Pay for Saga. Like the goal there is that when you go buy your coffee, that you have a seamless experience using tokens to go buy it. But that means that they have to convert to some fiat thing. And like the first partner, the people that I think of is like, okay, can we work with FTX? Because they already handled all the really hard part on the licensing and regulation and everything else and dealing with like fiat. So anytime there's opportunity for us to work together, they're awesome because it's basically like in those early days, they're really small. And I had this conversation over a phone call with Sam. It was like a couple conversations that were like 2-3 hours long. And we were just like, what does crypto need? It needs a shitload of throughput. And this is how we're going to build it. And like, the use case that I really wanted to see was like a central limit order book style exchange. And I even offered like, what if we built this for you guys? They're like, what? No, we built the best matching engine in the world. Please. And that night we saw the transactions on the chain just spike through the roof. And we could see that their engineers were trying to slam it and test it. And then the next day they were like, okay, this seems to work. It's actually live and does what it says. So why don't we just go build it? And that was how Serum got incubated. And that relationship was because there was a CEO that's in a fast growing small company that can make decisions quickly and really like focused everyone behind him to get them done. And that's really, really rare when you're dealing with big companies. Like, basically, like if you're listening and you're a startup founder, one of the things that I learned in like while building Solana is that the bigger companies will talk to you and often waste your time. And they may seem really important because the brand is really big, but maybe the folks that you should be talking to are like a startup that's just one leg above you, right? Like they're just made it to that next leg on the ladder and they're growing really quickly and they know what they want and they can just go execute on it quickly. And you don't even need a lot of docs. You just need a handshake and like kind of trust that person. And that's really what like is awesome about FTX. And there's a couple other companies like Jump, I would say is one of those too, even though they are much bigger, right? They have like, I think 1,000+ employees and stuff, but they're able to like make these big decisions and go build and work really, really quickly.
So Anatoly, I know you're a very busy man, so we don't want to take up too much more of your time here, but I would love to just finish off here. Where do we see Solana 5, 10 years, 15 years from now? Like, where do you see the state of crypto, but really, alongside Solana, where do you see that going? Tough question.
No, what I hope it's like Linux, that there's enough products and builders building on top of it that, it went from being like a bunch of weirdos to companies that are major contributors across different, like totally different use cases. And that to me would be like an awesome success, that we see folks that are like financial, like Jump, contributing to the same code base as Magic Eden that's purely like entertainment focused. It means that we actually built a real operating system for the stuff that's generic and like performant and can serve many different use cases. That would be awesome. So this is where I hope Solana ends up.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you so much for popping on here with Pounding the Table. And Jake, for those watching here on YouTube, thank you for making the introduction here to Anatoly. I think this is a fantastic conversation. I definitely want to continue to watch where Solana goes from here and hopefully stay in touch. Maybe a year or two from now, we can reconnect and walk through all the amazing things that you guys have accomplished through that time. So,
this one here for all that try to count me out and they still counting. Honestly, I never doubted. Say the top is never crowded. Well, I'm trying to climb the